The mail-order bride advertisement promised a new life in Redemption, Arizona, a chance for a home, a husband, and a future far from the famine and failure of her past. But when Alaric Finch arrived, she found redemption was just a gilded cage, and her intended Silas Cain was its cruel keeper. She was trapped with nothing but a dusty, barren plot of land to her name. That first night, as a storm raged, a sound from beneath her rickety porch would change everything. It was the sound of a man dying. She thought she was saving a stranger's life. She had no idea she was sheltering a warrior prince, igniting a war and unearthing a love that would either build a kingdom or burn them both to ash. The dust of the Arizona territory tasted of broken promises. Alaric Finch felt it coat her tongue, grit between her teeth, and settle in a fine red layer upon the black mourning dress that was her only possession of quality. The journey west had stripped everything from her, the last of her savings, the soft memories of green Ohio hills, and the girlish hope that had propelled her to answer the advertisement in the Matrimonial Times. Seeking a wife of good character and strong constitution, future husband is a prosperous landowner in the burgeoning town of Redemption, all travel expenses paid. A life of comfort and security awaits. The author of that promise, Mr. Silas Cain, stood on the platform of the Redemption train station. He was not the humble, smiling man in the faded photograph he'd sent. This man was solid, imposing, with a tailored waistcoat, stretched tight across a broad chest, and eyes the color of a winter sky, cold and appraising. He looked not at her face, but at her hands, her form as if judging livestock. "Miss Finch," he said, his voice a low rumble that did not match the warm, poetic words of his letters. "You are smaller than I anticipated. The journey was arduous, Mr." Cain Alaric replied, her own voice steadier than she felt. She clutched the handle of her worn satchel. "I am stronger than I look. You'll need to be." He gave a curt nod, his gaze sweeping over the dusty street as if he owned it. And in a way he did. The Cain Saloon and Mercantile dominated the town's main thoroughfare. The sheriff, a portly man named Bodie with a drooping mustache, tipped his hat to Cain with a deference usually reserved for royalty. The prosperous land she was to share was a small, dilapidated cabin on the edge of town, a good mile from the main street. It sat on a patch of earth so parched it looked like a scar on the landscape. A single skeletal cottonwood tree stood guard over it. "The main homestead is being renovated," Cain explained, without a hint of apology. "This will be your residence for the time being." To acclimate, he left her there. No offer of a meal, no kind word. Just a set of keys and a warning. This is Apache land, or was. They're mostly driven out now, but renegades are like cockroaches. Stay indoors after dark. I'll send for you in a week to begin your duties at the Mercantile. We'll be wed by the end of the month. The cabin was a hovel. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing the warped plank walls. The floorboards groaned under her weight, and the air was thick with the scent of disuse and sun-baked wood. That night, a savage monsoon storm broke over Redemption. Thunder cracked like a celestial whip, and rain fell in punishing sheets, turning the dust outside to a thick, running mud. Alaric lay on the lumpy straw mattress, listening to the wind howl and the cabin creak, feeling a profound and terrifying loneliness. She had not found a new life. She had traded one prison for another. It was then she heard it. Beneath the cacophony of the storm, a low, guttural sound from directly under the floor. A groan of pure agony. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her despair. A coyote, perhaps, or some other wounded animal seeking shelter. She lit the single kerosene lamp, its flickering light casting monstrous shadows. Holding it aloft, she crept to the front door, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound came again, closer this time, from beneath the small rickety porch. It was no animal. It was human. Common sense, every instinct for self-preservation, screamed at her to bar the door and ignore it. Cain's warning about renegades echoed in her mind, but another voice, the one that belonged to her father, the Ohio doctor who had taught her compassion above all else, whispered back. She couldn't leave a soul to die in the mud. Pulling her thin shawl tight, she unlatched the door and stepped out into the maelstrom. The wind tore at her, and the rain soaked her thin dress instantly. She lowered the lamp. There, wedged in the dark, muddy space beneath the porch, was a man. He was Apache, that much was clear from his high cheekbones, the long black hair plastered to his face, and the simple leather breeches he wore. His torso was bare, revealing a physique of lean, hard muscle, but it was marred by a terrible wound. A deep, ragged gash ran from his shoulder, down his side, dark and sluggish with blood even in the pouring rain. His eyes were closed, his face a mask of pain. In one hand, he still gripped a blood-stained knife. He was dying, right here under her home. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Alaric stood frozen in the rain, and her own terror washing over her. Helping him would be madness. If Cain or Sheriff Bodie found an Apache warrior on her property, they would hang him from her cottonwood tree, and likely run her out of town on a rail, if not worse. But to leave him, to let him drown in the mud and his own blood? She couldn't. It wasn't in her. With a resolve born of desperation and a deep buried well of strength, she made a decision. She knelt in the mud, the lamplight shimmering on the water, pooling around them. "All right," she whispered to the storm, to the unconscious man, to herself. "Let's not die tonight." She grabbed his arm. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. Gritting her teeth, she pulled, straining her boots, sliding in the slick mud. He was the enemy she'd been warned about, the savage renegade from Cain's stories. But as she struggled to drag him from his muddy grave and into the dubious sanctuary of her broken-down cabin, all she saw was a human being, and all she knew was that her life in redemption had just taken a turn so sharp and dangerous she might never see the dawn. Dragging the warrior inside was a Herculean task. He was taller than she'd realized, his limbs long and powerful, even in their inertia. She managed to get him onto the grimy floor, his wet, muddy body leaving a trail from the door. He was burning with fever, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Alaric's training, rudimentary as it was kicked in. For years she had assisted her father, Dr. Alastair Finch, cleaning wounds, boiling instruments, and stitching skin. First she needed light and hot water. She stuffed rags into the cracks of the door and windows, creating a fragile seal against the storm and any prying eyes. She stoked the small wood-burning stove, her hands trembling as she filled a pot with water from the rain barrel. The wound was worse than she'd thought. It was a bullet graze, deep and torn, but it was the secondary injury that was killing him. A piece of wood, perhaps from a shattered branch or fence post, was embedded deep in the muscle of his side. It was festering. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Once his eyes fluttered open, dark, fathomless eyes that fixed on her with a momentary flash of fierce intelligence before clouding over with pain. He muttered something in a language that was like the whisper of the wind through canyons, harsh and beautiful. "Shh," she soothed, as she would a frightened horse. "I'm not going to hurt you." Cleaning the wound was an intimate and brutal business. She used whiskey from a small flask she'd kept for medicinal purposes to sterilize her father's pocket knife and tweezers. He flinched and groaned as she worked, his muscles tensing under her touch. With a final desperate pull, she extracted the splinter, a jagged, blood-blackened piece of wood, nearly 3 inches long. The man cried out a raw, guttural sound that was quickly muffled as he lapsed back into unconsciousness. She poured the rest of the whiskey directly into the wound. He arched his back, a silent scream, twisting his features. Alaric's heart ached, but she knew it was necessary. She then stitched the gash closed with her own mending thread, the needle thick and clumsy, her stitches uneven but tight. She used the last of her clean linen, torn from a petticoat, for a bandage. For 2 days he was a ghost in her cabin, a dangerous secret hidden beneath a threadbare blanket. The fever raged. He thrashed in his delirium, speaking in the Apache tongue, his words sharp and commanding, one moment soft and pleading the next. Alaric sat by his side, forcing sips of water between his cracked lips, bathing his forehead with cool rags. She learned the landscape of his face, the proud arch of his nose, a faint scar above his left eyebrow, the stern set of his jaw that softened only in the depths of his fevered sleep. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. She awoke on the floor beside him, her head resting on her arms, to find him watching her. The delirium was gone. His eyes were clear, intelligent, and wary as a hawk's. He said nothing. He simply watched her, his gaze missing no detail, the fraying cuffs of her dress, the exhaustion etched around her eyes, the gentle way she moved. Alaric, feeling the weight of that silent scrutiny, offered him a cup of water. He took it, his hand surprisingly steady, and drank deeply. Communication was a slow, painstaking dance of gestures and single words. He pointed to himself. "Nachokai," he said. The name was strong, resonant. She pointed to herself. "Alaric." He tried the name, his tongue stumbling over the foreign sounds. "Abigail." It sounded less like a name and more like a piece of the landscape he was trying to understand. Through gestures, he told her he had been ambushed. He pointed east, made a shape of a rifle, then mimicked the treachery of a knife in the back, his expression darkening with a cold fury. He was alone, separated from his people. Alaric in turn tried to explain her own situation. She pointed to the letters from Silas Cain, then made the shape of a ring around her finger, and finally a gesture of a cage. She didn't know if he understood the nuances, but when she spoke, Cain's name, a flicker of recognition and contempt, crossed his face. He knew of the man. The secret they shared forged a strange and powerful intimacy in the tiny, isolated cabin. He was a wanted man, a renegade Apache. She was a trapped woman, a piece of property waiting to be claimed. In that small space, they were simply Nachokai and Alaric. She shared her meager rations of hardtack and dried beans. He in turn taught her things. He showed her how to read the subtle shifts in the wind, how to listen for the sound of a horse miles away. He showed her which roots growing near the cottonwood were edible, which leaves could be boiled into a tea to soothe a cough. One evening, as the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, they sat in the growing twilight of the cabin. His wound was healing, the crude stitches holding. He was regaining his strength, and a restless energy was beginning to emanate from him. Why, he asked the single English word, stark in the silence. He gestured to himself, then to her. Why? Help Alaric looked at her hands, thinking of her father, of the oath he'd taken, and taught her to respect. "Where I come from," she said softly. "We don't let people die in the rain. No matter who they are." Nachokai considered this for a long time. His gaze drifted to the window towards the distant purple mountains that were his home. He saw the bars of her cage more clearly than she did. He saw the predator that was Silas Cain circling her, and he recognized the scent of ownership and oppression. He had fought it his entire life. He turned back to her, his dark eyes intense, holding a fire she had not seen before. He reached out, not touching her, but his presence filled the space between them. "You give me life," he said, his English slow and deliberate, pieced together from encounters with traders and soldiers. "My life is yours. These men, this Cain, they build prisons of dust and wood." He gestured to the world outside, then pressed a fist to his own chest. "My people, we have a kingdom, not of gold, of mountain, of river, of freedom." He looked directly into her eyes, and the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in the lamplight. "He promises you a cage," Nacho Kai vowed, his voice, a low, powerful whisper that resonated deep in her soul. "You gave me back my dawn. I will give you love. And I will give you a kingdom." Alaric's breath caught in her throat. It was the most outlandish, impossible promise she had ever heard. He was a wounded warrior, hiding under her floorboards. She was a destitute mail-order bride. Yet in that moment, looking into the fierce sincerity of his eyes, she believed him. For the first time since arriving in this God-forsaken land, she felt a flicker of something she had thought long-dead hope. And it was more terrifying than any danger Silas Cain could ever pose. The week of Alaric's acclimation period passed in a blur of shared secrets and simmering tension. During the day, Nacho Kai rested in the stifling heat of the cabin, silent and still as a stone, listening to the world outside with an intensity that unnerved her. At night he would pace the small room like a caged panther, his strength returning, his eyes full of a restless fire. He spoke of his home, a hidden valley in the Verde Canyon he called Tsebiu-Jiu Rock, standing in the mountains. It was a sanctuary his people, a small band of the Chiricahua, had protected for generations. It was this kingdom he had promised her. The illusion of their isolated world was shattered by a hard rap on the door. It was Sheriff Bodie. "Miss Finch," he said, his eyes lingering on her with a greasy familiarity. "Mr. Cain sent me to fetch you. Your duties at the mercantile begin today." Alaric's heart leaped into her throat. Nacho Kai was in the cabin. He had pressed himself into the darkest corner, behind a stack of crates left by the previous owner, a blanket thrown over him. It was a pathetic hiding place. "Of course, Sheriff," she said, forcing a smile. She stepped outside, quickly pulling the door shut behind her. "Let me just get my bonnet." Bodie's gaze swept over the cabin, his expression one of bored suspicion. "Cain's getting impatient. Says you've had enough time to settle. Best not to keep him waiting." The mercantile was the heart of Silas Cain's empire. It sold everything from flour and bullets to lace and laudanum. Cain stood behind the main counter, a proprietor surveying his domain. When Alaric entered, he gave her a thin proprietary smile. "Alaric." "Welcome," he said, his tone suggesting she was just another item of inventory. "Your work will be simple. You'll stock the shelves, serve the ladies, and keep the place tidy. My customers will appreciate a woman's touch." The work was grueling. The townswomen, taking their cue from Cain, treated her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They were wives who had followed their husbands west, not mail-order brides bought and paid for. To them, Alaric was little more than a hired woman with the promise of a wedding ring. She was Cain's property, and they knew it. Cain watched her constantly. His presence was a physical weight in the room. He would come up behind her as she stacked tins of peaches, his proximity making her skin crawl. He'd place a hand on the small of her back, a gesture that was meant to look affectionate to onlookers, but felt like a brand. "You're a quick learner, Alaric," he murmured one afternoon, his voice close to her ear. "Obedient." "I like that. A man needs an obedient wife." Each evening she would return to the cabin, exhausted, her body aching, and her spirit frayed. But the moment she walked through the door and saw Nacho Kai, a sense of purpose returned. She would tell him about her day, about the whispers she heard, the land deals Cain was making, the fear he instilled in the populace. Nacho Kai listened, his face an unreadable mask, but his eyes absorbed every detail. He was healing rapidly. The wound was a puckered scar, and his movements were once again fluid and silent. He began venturing out at night, disappearing into the darkness, and returning before dawn, his pockets filled with wild onions or a snared rabbit. He was reacquainting himself with the land that had been stolen from him. One evening Cain escorted her home. It was a gesture she could not refuse. As they approached the cabin, she felt a wave of panic. "Was Nacho Kai inside or out hunting this land you're on?" Cain said casually, gesturing to the barren plot. "It's worthless, but it abuts the southern pass into the Verde foothills. The army won't let me buy the canyon land directly treaty nonsense, but the owner of this parcel has access rights." He stopped and looked at her, his cold eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "As my wife, this land will be folded into my estate. It's a small but important piece of a much larger plan." Suddenly, it all clicked into place. Her cabin, this worthless patch of dust, was a key. It wasn't about her strong constitution or good character. It was about a legal loophole. She was a pawn in his game of conquest. When he tried to kiss her, a brutish, possessive gesture, she turned her head. "I am not your wife yet, Mr. Cain." His hand tightened on her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh. The affable mask dropped, revealing the tyrant beneath. "Do not forget your position, Alaric. You came here with nothing. I am giving you everything. I can just as easily take it all away and leave you with less than nothing." He released her and stormed off, leaving her shaken and bruised. When she entered the cabin, Nacho Kai was there. He had seen the entire exchange from the window. The look on his face was terrifying, a cold, controlled rage that was more potent than any shouted threat. He looked at the red marks on her arm, and his jaw tightened. "He puts his hands on you again," Nacho Kai said, his voice deadly quiet, "and he will lose them." The threat was real, and it sent a chill down her spine. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a fierce, protective warmth. Someone was on her side. The grip was tightening. Cain began to visit the cabin unannounced at odd hours. He was testing her, trying to catch her off guard. Each time Nacho Kai would vanish, melting into the landscape, or concealing himself with an almost supernatural stillness within the cabin shadows. The close calls left Alaric's nerves raw. One afternoon, Cain arrived with a small, leather-bound book. It was a land deed. "A wedding present, my dear," he said, spreading it on the rough-hewn table. "The deed to this fine piece of property. All it requires is your signature transferring ownership to the Cain family trust upon our marriage. A mere formality." Alaric stared at the document. It was her cage, spelled out in ink and legalese. Signing it would mean the end of any hope for freedom. It would give Cain the key he needed to move against Nacho Kai's people and their sacred land. I need to read it over," she stammered. Cain's eyes narrowed. "There's nothing to read. It's a standard contract. Sign it, Alaric." His voice was no longer persuasive. It was a command. The pressure was immense, suffocating. The entire town was his. The law was his. She had nowhere to run. Nacho Kai was one man against an army of Cain's making. Her small act of defiance, her secret rebellion, felt impossibly small and doomed to fail. Cain smiled, sensing her resolve crumbling. He pushed the pen towards her. The nib of the pen hovered over the deed, a black fang poised to strike. Alaric's hand trembled. Behind her, A floorboard creaked almost imperceptibly. It was a sound only she would notice the cabin's secret language. Nacho Kai was there in the shadows waiting. His presence was a silent counterweight to Cain's oppressive command. My father always told me to read anything before I signed it. Alaric said, her voice finding a surprising strength. He was a doctor, a man of letters. He would expect no less. Cain's face darkened, but forcing her to sign in that moment would look brutish. He prided himself on his veneer of civilization. "Fine," he snapped, snatching the pen back. "Read it, but have it signed by tomorrow evening. My patience is not infinite." After he left, Nacho Kai emerged. He didn't need to ask what the paper was. He had understood the threat in Cain's tone. He looked at the deed as if it were a coiled snake. "This is how he fights, Nacho Kai," said, tapping the document. "Not with arrows, but with paper that drinks the land." He looked at Alaric, his expression grim. "He will not stop." "Then we have to stop him." She whispered the words, surprising even herself. "We can't just run. He'll hunt us, and he'll take your land anyway." It was a reckless declaration, but in that moment they were no longer a rescuer and a victim. They were partners. A desperate plan began to form, woven from her knowledge of Cain's world and Nacho Kai's understanding of the land and its secrets. They needed an ally, someone inside the town who wasn't under Cain's thumb. Dr. Morrison Alaric said suddenly, "Elias Morrison. He took over my father's practice in Ohio for a year before coming west. He's old and cantankerous, but he hates bullies." The next day, feigning a headache, Alaric visited the doctor's office, a small cluttered room that smelled of carbolic acid and dust. Dr. Morrison was a hawk-faced man with spectacles perched on his nose and kind, weary eyes. "Alaric Finch," he said, looking up from a medical journal. "I heard you'd arrived. Heard you were betrothed to Silas Cain." He said the name as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. Taking a huge risk, Alaric told him everything. She omitted Nacho Kai's presence in her cabin, instead framing it as a discovery. She told him about a wounded Apache she had helped, about his people's sacred land, and Cain's scheme to acquire it using her as a pawn. Morrison listened without interruption, his fingers steepled. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. He rose, walked to his window, and looked out at the dusty street where Cain's saloon stood like a monument to greed. "I've been patching up men from Cain's mining survey teams for months," the doctor said quietly. "They're not surveying, they're prospecting, illegally on treaty land. Cain's been paying them under the table, keeping it all off the books. He's looking for silver. If he finds it, he'll use that deed from you to claim legal access, and the territory government, which he has in his pocket, will look the other way while he strips the canyon bare." He turned back to Alaric, his eyes sharp. "Cain keeps a private ledger, a detailed record of his real business, bribes, illegal wages, mineral assays. He's arrogant. He believes no one would ever dare to look. It's in the safe in his office behind the bar at the saloon." There it was. The proof. A weapon made of paper. "I can't get it," Alaric said. "He never lets me near his office." No, Morrison agreed. But a man like Cain has appetites. He hosts a private poker game every Thursday night in the back room. High stakes. The only time he's distracted, and the only time the saloon is quiet. The plan was terrifyingly simple. Nacho Kai would break into the office and get the ledger. But he didn't know the layout of the saloon, and a strange Apache creeping around would be shot on sight. "I can draw him a map," Alaric said, her mind racing, "and I can create a diversion." That night she explained the plan to Nacho Kai. He listened intently, his gaze fixed on her face as she sketched the layout of the saloon on a piece of wrapping paper from the mercantile. The bar, the office, the back room, the alley window. "The window is barred," she noted. Nacho Kai simply nodded. Iron can be persuaded. 2 nights later, it was Thursday. The moon was a slim crescent, offering little light. Alaric, pleading another headache, was excused from her evening duties. She made her way not to her cabin, but to the back of the livery stable, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm. As instructed by Dr. Morrison, she carried a lit lantern. The diversion was to be a small fire, just some old hay in a deserted corner of the livery yard, enough to cause a panic and draw everyone, including Sheriff Body, away from the saloon. Meanwhile, Nacho Kai, his face and arms darkened with a mixture of charcoal and grease, moved like a phantom through the back alleys of Redemption. He reached the saloon office window. Using a small flat rock as a wedge and his own immense strength as a lever, he worked on the rusted iron bar, applying slow, silent pressure. The metal groaned in protest. In the livery yard, Alaric's hands shook as she touched the lantern's flame to the pile of dry hay. It ignited with a terrifying whoosh. Flames leaped towards the sky. She screamed fire and ran towards the main street, her voice adding to the growing clamor. Men poured out of the saloon, Cain among them, his face a mask of fury at the interruption. The town's volunteer fire bucket brigade sprang into clumsy action. In the ensuing chaos, as Sheriff Bode lumbered towards the fire, the saloon was left momentarily empty. The bar on the window popped free. Nacho Kai slipped inside the office, silent as falling dust. He found the safe a large black iron box. It was locked as expected, but his people were masters of observation. He had watched blacksmiths, railroad engineers. He understood mechanics' stress and weakness. He had brought a tool with him, a hardened steel chisel taken from the blacksmith's shed. He didn't try to pick the lock. He went for the hinges. Finding a slight gap in the casting, he wedged the chisel in and struck it with the rock, the sound muffled by a piece of leather. It was slow, brutal work. Sweat poured down his body. Outside, he could hear the shouts from the fire dying down. Time was running out. With a final sharp crack, one of the hinges gave way. It was enough. He pried the heavy door open and found it a thick black ledger. He grabbed it, slipped back out the window, and vanished into the night. Alaric returned to her cabin an hour later, her clothes smelling of smoke, her nerves screaming. The fire had been put out, causing little damage, but creating the perfect diversion. The cabin was empty and dark. For a terrifying moment, she thought he'd been caught. Then he stepped out of the shadows, a wraith in the moonlight. In his hand he held the ledger. He had done it. They had Cain's secrets. But as Alaric looked at the book, a new cold fear washed over her. Having the weapon was one thing, wielding it was another. Cain was not a man who would take such a loss quietly. He would not just be defeated, he would seek utter and complete vengeance. They hadn't just stolen a book, they had signed their own death warrants. The ledger was a Rosetta Stone of Silas Cain's corruption. Page after page, written in his own arrogant script, detailed payoffs to territorial officials, illegal shipments of mercury for silver processing, and geological survey maps of Nacho Kai's sacred canyon, marked with potential dig sites. It was enough to see him imprisoned for a decade. "We have to get this to the U.S. Marshal in Prescott, Alaric," whispered, tracing a finger over a column of figures. Prescott is a 4-day ride. Nacho Kai countered, his gaze fixed on the window, ever watchful. Cain will know the book is gone by morning. He will lock this town down. No one will get out. He was right. Their victory felt hollow, a temporary reprieve before the storm broke. They were trapped in Redemption with a stick of dynamite, and the fuse was already lit. They needed a messenger, a way to get the ledger out, while they remained behind to face Cain's wrath. Their hope rested again on Dr. Morrison. The next morning, Alaric wrapped the ledger in oilcloth and hid it at the bottom of her market basket. She met the doctor on his morning rounds, slipping the book to him in a tense, silent exchange behind the assay office. "My supply runner, a young man named Peterson, leaves for Prescott this afternoon," Morrison murmured, not meeting her eye. "He's trustworthy. I'll see that this gets into the marshal's hands. You two need to disappear. Go now. Head for the mountains and don't look back." It was sound advice, but Alaric knew it wasn't that simple. Cain wouldn't just let her vanish. He would see it as the ultimate theft, not of his ledger, but of his property. He would hunt her. When she returned to the cabin, Nacho Kai was preparing to leave. He had fashioned a new bow and a quiver of arrows, his movements economical and precise. He had a small pouch of dried meat and a water skin. "We leave at dusk," he said. "We move through the Badlands. He will not follow us there." But they never got the chance. The betrayal came not from a hardened gunslinger or a corrupt official, but from a place Alaric never expected. Martha Hemlock, a quiet widow who ran the town's bakery, had always been kind to Alaric, offering a sympathetic word or a day-old pastry. Alaric had confided in her not about Nacho Kai, but about her fears of marrying Cain, about his coldness. That afternoon, Sheriff Bodie paid Martha a visit. Her husband had left her with a mountain of debt, a fact Cain was well aware of. Bodie made her an offer Cain would forgive her entire debt to the mercantile in exchange for a little information. Had the Finch girl seemed anxious? Had she bought any unusual supplies? Did she speak of leaving, terrified and desperate? Martha cracked. She mentioned that Alaric had seemed especially distraught, and that she had purchased a large quantity of oilcloth just the day before. Said she needed to patch the roof, Martha had explained weakly. It was a small detail, seemingly insignificant. But to a suspicious man like Cain, it was everything. Why would a woman planning a wedding be patching a temporary roof with expensive oilcloth? It smelled of preparation for a journey. He put the town on high alert. He had 2 of his hired gunslingers, the Calloway brothers, watch Alaric's cabin from a distant ridge. As dusk began to settle, casting long shadows across the parched land, Alaric and Nacho Kai prepared to flee. He slung the quiver over his shoulder, and she wrapped her shawl tightly around her. They were standing by the door when the first shot rang out. It wasn't aimed at them. It was a signal. The cabin door burst open, and Sheriff Bodie stood there, a shotgun leveled at them. Behind him, the Calloway brothers flanked the entrance, pistols drawn. Cain himself stepped into the doorway, his face a thundercloud of triumphant rage. His eyes went from the ledger-shaped bulge, missing from Alaric's basket, to Nacho Kai, standing defiant in the center of the room. "Well, well," Cain sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "The renegade and his little pet. I knew there was a reason this place felt infested." Nacho Kai moved a blur of motion, shoving Alaric behind him and drawing his knife, but he was hopelessly outnumbered. "Don't be a fool, savage." Bodie grunted, cocking the shotgun. The sound was deafening in the small space. Cain's cold eyes settled on Alaric. "You have caused me a great deal of trouble. You and your filthy companion have stolen from me. I want my property back." "It's on its way to Prescott," Alaric said, her voice shaking but defiant. "It's over, Silas." A flicker of genuine fury crossed Cain's face before he masked it with a cruel smile. "Is it a book is just a book, but a hanging is a spectacle. We'll hang your warrior here for the murder of my survey team. I'm sure we can find a witness. And as for you," he stepped forward, grabbing her arm in a vice-like grip, "you and I have a wedding to plan." Nacho Kai lunged, but one of the Calloway brothers slammed the butt of his pistol into the side of his head. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. "Get him to the jail," Cain commanded Bodie. "Put him in the solitary cell." No food, no water. We'll have a trial and a hanging before the week is out. As they dragged Nachokai's limp body out of the cabin, Cain pulled Alaric close, his whiskey-sour breath hot on her face. He held her chin, forcing her to look at him. "Here is my final offer," he hissed. "You will get that book back. You will find a way. You will stop that messenger. And you will marry me right here in the center of town and sign over this land and your life to me. If you do this, I will let your savage live. I will exile him. Let him run back to his caves. If you refuse, or if that book reaches the marshal, I will have him hanged, and I will make it slow, and I will make you watch." He shoved her back into the cabin and locked the door from the outside. She was a prisoner once more, but this time her cage was smaller, the stakes infinitely higher. She rushed to the window and saw them throwing Nachokai over a horse bound and bleeding. Her plan was in ruins. Her ally was captured, and she was left with an impossible choice: sacrifice the kingdom for the man she loved, or sacrifice the man for the dream of a kingdom she might never see. The silence in the cabin was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Alaric was trapped, Cain's ultimatum, a death knell echoing in her ears. For hours she paced the floor, her mind a maelstrom of fear and frantic calculation. She could not betray Nachokai's people. She could not let Cain win. But the image of Nachokai on a scaffold, his life forfeit because of her, was a torment she could not bear. There had to be another way. Her eyes fell upon the stack of Cain's letters, the poetic, fraudulent promises that had lured her to this hell. And an idea, desperate and razor-thin, began to form. It wasn't a plan for escape, but for a confrontation, a reckoning. The next morning, she used a piece of charcoal to write a note. She pushed it under the door, and when one of Cain's guards came to check on her, she called out, "Give this to Mr. Cain. I accept his terms." 2 hours later, Cain himself unlocked the door. His face was smug, victorious. "A wise decision, Alaric. I knew you would see reason. I have one condition," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the terror she felt. "We marry tomorrow, at noon, in front of the entire town. I will not be wed in secret like something to be ashamed of. I will be your wife, and the town will see it." She added the final crucial piece. "And you will give me your word, before all of them, that the Apache will be released and exiled once the deeds are signed." Cain's eyes narrowed, searching for a trick, but all he saw was a woman seeking to preserve a shred of dignity. It appealed to his arrogance, his love of spectacle. To have her submit to him so publicly would be the ultimate display of his power. Done, he agreed. Tomorrow at noon. What he didn't know was that Alaric had sent a second, more urgent message. The night before, while Cain celebrated his victory at the saloon, she had seen Dr. Morrison making a house call across the way. Tying a small note to a rock, she had thrown it with all her might, striking his door. The note contained a desperate plea and a set of instructions banking on the old doctor's courage. The next day dawned hot and breathless. The sky was a pale, unforgiving blue. A makeshift altar was set up in the street in front of the saloon. The entire town of Redemption was gathered, their faces a mixture of curiosity and fear. Sheriff Bodie, sweating in his formal coat, stood beside a beaming Silas Cain. Alaric was escorted from the cabin by the Calloway brothers. She wore her black mourning dress, the only one she had. It was fitting. She felt she was marching to her own execution. As she walked, her eyes scanned the crowd. She saw Martha Hemlock, her face pale with guilt, and Dr. Morrison, who gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod. The signal. As she reached the altar, Cain took her hand. His flesh was cool and clammy, A beautiful day for a new beginning, he whispered, his eyes gleaming with possessive triumph. The preacher, a nervous man named Reverend Michael, began the ceremony. Alaric's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt as though she were watching a play, a detached observer of her own doom. "Do you, Silas Cain, take this woman?" Suddenly, at the edge of the town, a column of thick, black smoke began to rise. A man shouted, "It's the old mill, it's on fire!" It was Dr. Morrison's diversion, bigger and more alarming than the one at the livery. Panic rippled through the crowd. Sheriff Bodie, ever the dolt, turned to Cain. "Mr. Cain, the mill. It's full of dry lumber." Cain's face contorted in fury. "Deal with it. I'll conclude my business here." As Bodie and half the men in the crowd ran towards the mill, creating chaos and confusion, a second event occurred. A single high-pitched bird call echoed from the hills overlooking the town. It was a signal Nacho Kai had taught her, the call of a peregrine falcon. It meant strike now. Alaric turned to Cain. "Before we finish," she said, her voice ringing out for all to hear, "you must honor your promise. You must give your word that the Apache Nacho Kai will be freed." Cain, eager to finish the ceremony, waved a hand dismissively. "You have my word. He will be exiled." "Your word isn't good enough, Silas," a voice boomed. It was Dr. Morrison. He strode forward, holding a familiar black book. "But perhaps your signature is—" He opened the ledger. "I have here a record of Silas Cain's payments to Sheriff Bodie to ignore illegal prospecting, a list of bribes to the Territorial Land Office, and a signed assay report confirming massive silver deposits in the Verde Canyon land protected by federal treaty." The crowd gasped. Cain's face went white with shock, then purple with rage. "Lies, he's a senile old fool. Is this your signature, Mr. Cain?" Morrison shouted, holding the book open. Cain was speechless. At that exact moment, the door to the sheriff's office burst open. Nacho Kai stood there, not in chains, but free. In his hand was the key to his cell, and on the floor behind him lay one of the Calloway brothers unconscious. Dr. Morrison's note had told him which deputy had the key, and a weak stomach for whiskey. A bottle of the doctor's strongest medicinal brandy had done the rest. "He is not a man of his word," Nacho Kai said, his voice carrying across the silent street. He pointed a finger at Cain. "He came to my people under a flag of truce. He shared our food. And that night his men ambushed us. He shot my father in the back. The revelation hung in the air, ugly and undeniable. Cain, exposed and cornered, did the only thing a man like him could." He drew a concealed derringer from his coat and grabbed Alaric, pulling her in front of him as a shield. "It's all of you against me, is it?" He screamed, his eyes wild. "This town is mine. The silver is mine." But he had miscalculated. The people of redemption were afraid of him, but they were not his slaves. Seeing the proof of his deception, his willingness to cheat and murder for profit broke the spell. And then they came. From the alleyways, from the rooftops, from the hills behind the town, figures emerged, silent, armed with bows and rifles, Nacho Kai's warriors. Alerted by a rider sent by Morrison days ago, they had come not to attack the town, but to witness justice and reclaim their leader. They didn't draw their weapons. They simply stood a silent, powerful jury. Cain was surrounded. The townsfolk, the warriors, and the truth. He shoved Alaric to the ground and fired a wild shot toward Nacho Kai. Nacho Kai didn't flinch, but from the crowd, a single gunshot answered Cain's. It was not a warrior's rifle. It was the old Colt revolver held in the trembling hand of Martha Hemlock, the baker, her face a mask of tears and resolve. She would not let another person be destroyed by the man who had driven her to betrayal. The shot struck Cain in the chest. He staggered back, a look of utter disbelief on his face. He dropped the derringer, clutching at the dark stain spreading across his waistcoat, before collapsing into the dust of the street he had sought to rule. Silence descended. The standoff was over. The reckoning was complete. Alaric looked from Cain's still form to Nacho Kai, who was already moving to her side. He helped her to her feet, his touch gentle. In the middle of the dusty street, surrounded by stunned townsfolk and silent warriors, they stood together, free. The kingdom of dust and greed had fallen. The dawn of a new one was about to begin. The aftermath of the reckoning was not celebration, but a quiet, stunned catharsis. The body of Silas Cain lay in the dust, a stark testament to a reign of fear that had ended as abruptly as it began. Sheriff Bodie returned from the false fire to find his master dead, and his authority evaporated. He was disarmed by the townsfolk, his badge thrown into the dirt, before a U.S. Marshal summoned by Dr. Morrison's messenger finally arrived 2 days later to take him, the Calloway brothers, and Cain's ledger back to Prescott for a federal trial. Redemption was a town without a tyrant, blinking in the unfamiliar light of freedom. In the days that followed, Alaric and Nacho Kai existed in a strange limbo between two worlds. His warriors remained camped in the hills, a watchful but peaceful presence that unnerved some townsfolk and reassured others. Nacho Kai moved between the two, a diplomat and a leader. He spoke with Dr. Morrison and the town council, not with threats, but with a quiet, unshakable authority. He did not ask for the town of Redemption to be dismantled. He asked for the treaty his people had signed in good faith to be honored. The Verde Canyon, his Tse Biu Jiu, was to be theirs unmolested. With Cain's ledger as proof of the conspiracy, the newly arrived federal authorities had no choice but to agree. Alaric found her own role. She was no longer an outcast. The women who had once scorned her now approached her with a quiet respect. She had faced down the devil they had all feared. Martha Hemlock, though cleared of any crime, was consumed by her guilt. It was Alaric who went to her not with accusations, but with understanding. "Fear makes us do things we regret, Martha," she said. "Courage is about what you do next." In that act of forgiveness, Alaric began to stitch the town's frayed soul back together. But her future and Nacho Kai's remained an unanswered question. One evening, he took her hand and led her from the cabin, not into the town, but towards the hills. They rode for hours, the moon their guide, until they reached a high mesa overlooking the entrance to the Verde Canyon. The view was breathtaking. Under a blanket of stars, the canyon was a vast, sleeping creature of shadow and rock. A cool wind smelling of pine and damp earth whispered through the junipers. This was his home. This was his kingdom. "He promised you a cage of comfort and security." Nacho Kai said, his voice soft, almost lost in the vastness. "I promised you love and a kingdom." He turned to her, his dark eyes searching hers in the starlight. "My kingdom is not a place of ease. The winters are harsh. The work is hard. We hunt for our food. We defend our borders. It is a life of struggle. Of freedom, but of struggle." He took her hands in his. They were strong, calloused, the hands of a warrior and a leader. "I can offer you no silks, no grand house. I offer you my heart. I offer you a place by my side, as a leader of my people if they will have you. I offer you a home, built of rock and sky. This is the only kingdom I have to give." Alaric looked out at the wild, beautiful, and dangerous land before her. She thought of the stifling parlors of Ohio, of the grimy oppression of Cain's town. She had never wanted silks or a grand house. She had wanted a life that was real, a purpose that was her own. She had craved a love that was not a transaction, but a partnership of equals. She met his gaze, her heart full of a feeling so vast it mirrored the canyon below. I have lived in a cage, Nachokai, she said, her voice clear and strong in the mountain air. I choose the sky. His stern face broke into a rare, beautiful smile. He did not need to give her a kingdom. Together, standing on that mesa, between the world of the white man and the world of the Apache, they understood they would have to build one of their own. It would not be a kingdom of land or of riches, but one forged in the crucible of their shared past, a place of mutual respect, hard-won freedom, and a love that had been found in the darkest of places, under a broken-down porch on a night of thunder and rain. Their future would be a difficult and uncharted path, but for the first time in her life, Alaric Finch felt she was finally truly home. And so, the story of Alaric Finch, the mail-order bride who refused to be bought, and Nachokai, the warrior who fought for more than just land, comes to a close. Theirs is a testament to the fact that true kingdoms aren't inherited or conquered. They are built hand in hand by those with the courage to defy the world, as it is for the dream of what it could be. It's a story of how the deepest love can bloom in the harshest soil, and how a single act of compassion, saving a stranger from a stormy grave, can change the destiny of not just two people but of nations. What would you have done in Alaric's place? Would you have risked everything for a stranger? Let me know in the comments below. If this story of courage, rebellion, and unlikely love in the unforgiving American West moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a powerful real-life drama, and most importantly, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more true tales of the Wild West. Thank you for listening.